So imagine walking up to a graveyard and seeing absolute undeniable proof of a miracle.
Like something totally impossible.
Right. A massive stone weighing thousands of pounds just tossed aside like a mere pebble. You'd think the immediate reaction would be uncontainable joy.
Whoa, definitely. Like a sudden, overwhelming surge of faith.
Yeah, but what if the actual documented response to seeing undeniable proof of the supernatural was, well, pure paralyzing terror?
It completely flips our modern expectations upside down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we think we want proof, but the reality of encountering something that shatters the laws of physics is uh, a lot harder to process than we give it credit for.
It really is. And we are jumping right into a fascinating stack of sermon transcripts, expository outlines, and study notes today, all zeroing in on the final chapter of the Gospel of Mark.
Mark chapter 16, yeah.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to move entirely past the traditional pastel-colored, sanitized Easter narrative.
We were going way beyond the Sunday school version.
Way beyond. We're going to uncover a hidden, almost poetic symmetry in the life of Jesus. And we're going to dissect a critical psychological difference that impacts, honestly, every single one of us.
The gap between having evidence of an event and having an experience that actually rewires your life.
Yes, that gap is everything. But to do that properly, we have to kind of strip away 2,000 years of comfortable tradition.
Right. We need to put ourselves right in the dirt and the grit of the actual scene. The context here is just so crucial.
Paint that picture for us. What does it actually look like?
Well, it's early morning. The sun is barely coming up, so the shadows in this garden are long and, eerie. The women approaching this tomb haven't slept properly in days.
I mean, they've got to be totally exhausted.
Exhausted and drowning in the trauma of grief. And they are arriving to perform a highly distasteful, heavy task.
Anointing a body.
Right. A body that has been dead in the Middle Eastern heat for 3 days. Their nerves are completely fried.
So, whether you are someone who has studied theology for decades or you're just insanely curious about ancient history and how human beings process trauma and the supernatural, I want you to step directly into this story with us.
There are profound aha moments hiding in plain sight here.
There really are. And surprisingly, to understand the end of this narrative at the tomb, the notes suggest we first have to look all the way back at how the story began.
Yeah, there is an astonishing parallel between Jesus' birth and his burial. It's this structural symmetry that you'll easily miss if you're just skimming the text.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the texts point out this Joseph and Mary coincidence, and it really caught my attention.
It's wild once you see it.
Right. Think about the very beginning of Jesus' earthly life, the womb. Who is present? Mary the mother and Joseph the foster father.
Exactly.
Now, fast forward 33 years to the end of his earthly life, the tomb. Who is there? The texts note there are multiple Marys arriving, and the tomb itself was provided by a man named Joseph of Arimathea.
The names perfectly bookend the story. But the authors of these outlines argue that it goes much deeper than just, a neat literary trick.
How so?
Well, both of these spaces, the womb and the tomb, were consecrated spaces. And they both belonged to men named Joseph.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the ownership aspect.
Yeah, Mary's body and future belonged to her betrothed, Joseph. And the garden tomb legally belonged to Joseph of Arimathea.
That's a huge connection.
Right, and in both instances, these men freely surrendered their legal rights and their property to God for a divine purpose.
But what is the actual significance of that? I mean, why does it matter that both spaces were borrowed?
Because it highlights the transitional nature of what was happening. Neither the womb nor the tomb were meant for permanent habitation.
They were temporary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus was in the womb for roughly 9 months, which is exactly the time required to prepare a physical body for an earthly ministry. And he was only in the tomb for 3 days.
It's like he was just renting a hotel room in both instances.
The hotel room, yeah.
You don't bring all your furniture and live in a hotel forever. It's a borrowed space meant for a brief layover. He occupied them for the exact amount of time required for the transition, and then he left them, returning the spaces back to the owners.
That's a perfect analogy. And here is where the theology gets really interesting. While he was in those temporary hotel rooms, something incredible was happening, completely out of sight.
Out of sight in the dark.
Right. One of the expository outlines connects this to Psalm 139, which contains the phrase, intricately wrought in the depths of the earth.
Intricately wrought.
Yeah, and historically, the psalmist was using poetic language to describe a mother's womb. But the text draws a direct parallel to the tomb, which was literally carved into the depths of the earth.
Right, because in both of these spaces, they are completely shut off from human eyes. No one can see inside the womb, and no one can see behind the massive stone of the tomb.
Exactly. In both hidden places, the Holy Spirit was executing a powerful creative work in absolute darkness.
Which is such a cool concept.
It is. In the womb, the Spirit is weaving together a mortal body for a 33-year earthly ministry. And in the dark of the tomb, that same Spirit is doing a secondary hidden creative work.
Framing a glorious, ageless, resurrected body.
Exactly. The underlying logic here is that the divine often accomplishes its most profound, creative work in spaces that are dark, hidden, and completely inaccessible to human observation.
Which sets up this incredible tension. You have the secret, miraculous work happening in the dark, and it ultimately leads to a grand reveal on Sunday morning. The curtain is about to be pulled back.
The big reveal.
But wait, if they are about to see the result of this incredible hidden miracle, why is their reaction so negative?
That brings us to the psychology of the text, which is arguably the most fascinating part of this deep dive.
Yeah, the psychology here is wild.
The women walk into the garden, and before they've even had a sip of water or a bite to eat, they are confronted with three distinct, staggering supernatural signs.
The text lists them out clearly. First, the massive stone is rolled away. Second, there's a young man in a blindingly white robe sitting there. And third, the tomb itself is entirely empty.
Let's look closely at the mechanics of that first sign, though, the stone. We tend to picture like a large rock you might find in a garden.
Like a heavy boulder.
Yeah, but historically, a tombstone for a wealthy man like Joseph of Arimathea weighed over a ton. It was set in a groove.
A literal ton.
Over a ton. It was specifically engineered by human mechanics to keep grave robbers out, and there were armed Roman guards stationed there under penalty of death to ensure it didn't move. It was the ultimate human obstacle.
But the women don't just find it pushed a few inches to the side.
No, they find it completely removed. One of the study notes describes an angel simply rolling it away and sitting on it.
Just using it as a chair.
Yeah, the author uses this brilliant, evocative phrase. The contempt of an angel for a ton block of stone.
The contempt of an angel, I genuinely love that phrasing. It paints such a vivid picture.
It really does. It explains the absolute disparity between human limitation and supernatural power. The angel treats this immovable, engineer human obstacle like a pebble, just flicks it out of the way and uses it as a lawn chair.
But here is where I have to push back, or at least, play devil's advocate for our modern mindset. We are obsessed with empirical data today.
I'm totally obsessed.
We constantly crave historical, scientific proof of the supernatural. I hear people say all the time, if God just showed me a miracle, if I could just see undeniable evidence of the supernatural with my own two eyes, I'd instantly be a bold, unwavering believer.
Right, the whole seeing is believing thing.
Exactly. If I walked into a garden and saw an angel sitting on a 1-ton stone, I feel like I'd pull out my phone, take a video, and start celebrating. Why on earth was their immediate reaction fear?
Because we severely underestimate what the psychological concept of ontological shock actually feels like.
Ontological shock.
Yeah, ontological shock happens when your fundamental understanding of reality, of what is real and what is impossible, collapses in an instant.
Oh, wow.
The authors argue that impartial, historical evidence of the supernatural doesn't make you happy. It breaks your brain.
Because if a man who was dead for 3 days can suddenly not be dead, then nothing you know about the world is safe anymore.
Precisely. If the laws of thermodynamics, biology, and physics can just be suspended by a being in a white robe sitting on a stone, your entire worldview shatters.
It's like the floor drops out from under you.
Exactly. When a human being is suddenly confronted with the raw, unvarnished supernatural, the natural biological and psychological reaction isn't joy. It is trembling, astonishment, and sheer paralyzing terror.
And the text is incredibly clear about the result of this. The evidence paralyzed them. They fled from the tomb and they said absolutely nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
Right. Pure, undeniable evidence resulted in pure silence.
Which is the critical distinction the notes are making between evidence and experience.
Yeah, the evidence of an empty tomb is enough to convince a rational mind that an impossible event has occurred. If you examine the historical evidence, it is highly convincing.
But raw evidence alone does not create a burning messenger.
It prepares the mind, but it does not change the heart. Evidence without relationship leaves you stuck in a state of fearful silence, because all you have is a shattered worldview with nothing to anchor it.
So logically, something has to bridge that gap. If raw evidence only leads to running away in terror, how on earth did this terrifying morning eventually spark a global historical movement?
Right, because it obviously didn't end there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Christianity didn't end with three terrified women hiding in a house in Jerusalem. The texts argue that breaking this paralysis requires a fundamental shift, moving from possessing intellectual evidence to having a personal experience.
And this is exactly where the narrative pivots. The story radically shifts when Jesus begins to personally appear.
He doesn't just leave an empty tomb as a cold empirical puzzle for them to solve.
No, he actually shows up in person. He appears first to Mary Magdalene in the garden, speaking her name. Then he appears to two disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, breaking bread with them. Finally, he appears to the 11 disciples as they are sitting at a table in the upper room.
And how exactly does that rewire their psychology? Why does seeing a person fix the ontological shock of the empty tomb?
Because a living person provides relational context to the broken reality. An empty tomb is a terrifying void.
It's just data.
Exactly. It's just data. But a living, breathing person who speaks your name transforms that void into an active relationship. The fear of the evidence transforms into faith in the experience.
The notes actually use a fantastic analogy to explain this mechanism, and it really made the concept click for me. It's the difference between reading about fire and actually feeling the heat of a flame.
Oh, I love that analogy.
So good, think about it. You can study the chemical equation for combustion. You can know the exact temperature required to ignite wood. You can read textbooks on thermodynamics and look at high-definition photographs of a campfire.
You can have all the facts.
You can possess all the factual evidence that fire exists, but until you hold your own hands up to the flames and physically feel the heat radiating onto your skin, you only know about the fire. You haven't experienced it.
It's a perfect illustration of what the text is doing. The empty tomb was the chemistry lesson. The women and the disciples saw the objective proof that the fire existed.
But meeting the risen Christ, speaking with him, touching him, eating with him, that was feeling the heat.
Yes. The authors argue that true, sustaining faith is only birthed when evidence gives way to an actual relational encounter. It is not merely believing a set of facts, it is knowing a living person.
Which means we need to take a hard look at how we process information today. The expository outlines actually turn this concept around to challenge the reader directly.
Yeah, they introduce terms like apologetics, which is essentially the intellectual defense of faith, using historical arguments, logic, and data.
Right, and the text asks the reader to evaluate their own worldview.
It forces a self-examination. The challenge is this. Is a person's worldview built merely on evidence? Is it constructed entirely out of apologetics, historical facts, and dry theological doctrines?
Because if it is, the text suggests that person is in danger of being exactly like the women at the empty tomb.
You might be intellectually convinced that the facts are true, but you will ultimately remain paralyzed and silent, because facts alone don't generate the heat required to change your life.
But once you transition from just knowing the facts to actually feeling the heat of the fire, it fundamentally alters your behavior. You literally cannot stay silent anymore.
Because experience demands expression. When the angels spoke to the women at the tomb, he gave them a very specific dual mandate. He said, "Come and see, now go and tell."
Come and see, go and tell. It's a two-step mechanism.
It is the entire framework of the message in a nutshell. First, verification. You have to step in, look at the evidence, and see reality for yourself. The text doesn't ask for blind faith. It says, come and see.
Right, verify it.
Yeah. But the mandate doesn't end there. You cannot stay in the tomb analyzing the stone. You must immediately take the reality of that experience and share it outwardly.
So why the urgency? Why is go and tell mandatory? The notes use a medical analogy here that perfectly captures the psychological imperative.
It really hits home.
Imagine if a team of scientists tomorrow discovered a permanent, easily accessible cure for every single form of cancer. Would they just lock that cure away in a laboratory vault? Would they keep it a secret, only sharing it with their closest colleagues?
Of course not. It would be a moral atrocity.
Exactly. It would be unthinkable. The magnitude of the discovery inherently demands the widest possible proclamation. You wouldn't need to force the scientists to hold a press conference. They would be kicking down the doors to tell the world.
And the argument presented in these historical notes is that overcoming death itself is infinitely greater than any medical breakthrough.
Way big.
Once these disciples actually experienced the living reality of the resurrection, keeping it locked away in the laboratory of the upper room was psychologically impossible. The joy and the magnitude of the experience completely overrode their initial terror.
But I want to highlight an interesting detail about who actually executed this mandate. Because Jesus didn't commission a PR firm.
No, definitely not.
He didn't send out a bunch of highly trained elite intellectuals carrying dry portfolios of historical evidence to debate the Roman philosophers.
No. The text is very clear that they went out as entirely ordinary, uncredentialed men and women. The sole qualifying difference was that their internal lives were now fueled by personal experience.
That was the only difference that mattered.
But there is another crucial mechanism at play here. As they obeyed that mandate to go into all the world, they weren't just shouting into the void alone.
Right. The end of the text specifically notes that the Lord actively worked with them, confirming their message.
Exactly. This wasn't just human persuasion. The text claims that the living experience traveled with them. They weren't just handing out textbooks about the fire. The fire was actively burning alongside them as they spoke, confirming the reality of the message through signs.
Which brings us to a really beautiful illustration from the notes that ties this all together. They map out the emotional timeline of this story, using the imagery of a sunrise.
Oh, the sunrise analogy is so powerful.
It is. They describe the crucifixion on Friday as total darkness, absolute crushing despair. Then, Saturday is tomb. It's just silence waiting in the hidden depths. But the resurrection on Sunday is the sunrise.
And the defining characteristic of a sunrise is its inevitability. Once the sun breaches the horizon, the darkness physically cannot hold its ground. It is forced to retreat.
It has no choice.
The cold dissipates, the shadows vanish, and the world wakes up. The authors are illustrating that moving from cold evidence to a living experience is like the sun finally rising in your own mind. It pushes out the fear.
Okay, let's take a breath and retrace the path we've taken in this deep dive because we've unpacked some really dense material.
We sure have.
We started by looking at the beautiful hidden symmetry of the womb of Mary and the tomb of Joseph. How the divine utilizes temporary, borrowed spaces in the dark to incubate incredible creative work.
Then we explored the paralysis of pure evidence. We unpacked the psychological reality that encountering a suspended law of physics, like an angel sitting on a one-ton stone, doesn't automatically create joy.
No, it creates ontological shock, terror, and silence.
Exactly. And finally, we broke down how the spark of a true relational experience is the only thing that can transform that terrified silence into bold action.
The shift from come and see to go and tell. Reading about the fire versus feeling the heat.
Which leads right into the application the authors pull from this text for anyone reading it today. Think back to that concept of the hidden work in the dark depths.
Yeah, the notes challenge the reader to look at their own life. Are there areas right now that feel stuck? A difficult season, a completely stalled career, a broken relationship, or just a heavy silence?
Areas that feel like they are permanently buried in the depths of a tomb.
The text challenges you to completely reframe how you view those spaces. What if that dark place isn't a tomb of finality? What if, mimicking the pattern of the womb in the tomb, it is actually a temporary borrowed space where something entirely new is quietly being created out of sight?
It's a profound shift in perspective. But there's one final, incredibly provocative thought derived from the historical reality of these manuscripts, and it leaves the reader with a major unresolved tension.
Oh, this is the part about how the Gospel of Mark originally ends, right? This blew me away.
It's one of the most fascinating details in biblical manuscript history. If you look at the absolute earliest, most reliable manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark, the original text does not include the appearances of Jesus or the disciples going out into the world.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it actually cuts off abruptly mid-thought at verse 8.
It just ends.
It literally ends with the sentence, "And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid."
Wow.
Full stop. The entire gospel ends on pure evidence, silence, and fear. Now, later scribes added the subsequent verses 9 through 20, to summarize the other historical accounts and round out the story. But Mark's original pen stopped dead at the silence of verse 8.
Think about the weight of that. If the historical reality had actually stopped there, if those women and disciples had never moved past the paralytic shock of the evidence into the relational experience of faith, that silence would have lasted forever.
The message would have permanently died right there in that garden.
And the authors of our study notes use this textual anomaly to pose a brilliant, challenging question to you. If you are living your life waiting for perfect, undeniable, flawless intellectual evidence before you are willing to take a leap of faith or step into an experience,
Are you accidentally writing an ending for yourself that stops at verse 8?
Are you allowing your own story to end in paralysis, silence, and fear when the mandate to step into the experience and go and tell is waiting for you?
Wow. At the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how easy it is to treat ancient texts like a comfortable, predictable narrative.
Right.
But when you realize the original manuscript essentially ends on a psychological cliffhanger of absolute terror, demanding that the reader themselves figure out how to resolve the tension, it completely changes the game.
It is no longer a safe story, it is a mirror.
It's an unfinished narrative that challenges you to complete it with your own lived experience.
We want to thank you for stepping into the dirt and the grit of this story with us on today's deep dive. We hope this exploration of the texts helped you understand the mechanics of belief a little better and maybe challenged you to look for the heat of the fire in your own life.
Keep seeking those aha moments. Keep asking the hard questions.
And seriously ask yourself, what is your verse 9 going to be?